Hi, I'm Nick Steenhout, and I've been involved with web accessibility in one way or another for a very long time. I've worked with thousands of disabled people that had a variety of disabilities. Um, I've worked with small nonprofit, government organizations, whether it's federal, state, local, provincial in Canada. Uh, I've worked with Fortune 500 companies and tertiary education providers. I run a podcast, the Accessibility Rules podcast, which, strangely enough, is about accessibility. And I hang out on Twitter a lot to talk about accessibility. Do feel free to reach out to me or tweet about this conference. That would be awesome. I am passionate about accessibility and about inclusion, and I'm going to share some of that passion with you today. But be warned, this talk isn't going to give you specifics about the nitty-gritty of what you need to do to make a website accessible. I'm not going to talk to you about programmatically associating error messages with erroneous inputs. I'm also not going to talk to you about alternate text for images. I'm going to make you think about more important ideas. Learning the specific markup, you can do that anywhere, at any time. What I'm hoping this presentation is going to do is it will trigger a paradigm shift for you. Here's a story. Imagine this. I was going down the street with my service dog. He was pulling my wheelchair. It was sunny and I was wearing dark wraparound sunglasses. As I went by an outdoor patio, I heard two people talking. One said to the other in that kind of loud whisper that you're not supposed to hear, but you still hear anyway. One person said, "Oh, isn't it sad he's blind and in a wheelchair?" So I stopped my wheelchair. I turned around. I said, "Yeah, but I'm not deaf." The point is, not everyone knows that service dogs are not just guide dogs. Not everyone knows that service dogs can do other things. They can detect seizures, they can pull wheelchairs, they can alert for folks who are deaf. There's a whole range. And it's okay not to know. There's many things to learn in your accessibility journey, and this is the same thing. You should assimilate the knowledge and move on. You should look forward, not backwards. The web, in essence, is about communication. It's a way to communicate, and technology has greatly improved communications. It wasn't that many years ago that deaf folks would use a sign for telephone to signify bathroom without having to sign bathroom. They used the word telephone because there was little chance it would be confused for anything else. Today, things have changed, and they've changed a lot. Phones are used for text messaging, for passing notes to one another. Say you're at the grocery store and you want to communicate to someone who's hearing, they don't sign, you can do that. You can use phone for video calls and you can sign on those video calls. The list goes on. Technology has evolved and it keeps evolving. So tech is about communications. And communication involves two people. It involves the sender and it involves the receiver. And in between that, we have the channel. Now, I won't go into communications theory because that would be a whole talk all on its own, but it's important to realize that there's many aspects to communication. And you can only work on being the best communication sender. And you can only work on your part of the channel, making sure that's accessible. In other words, you can control how accessible your message is and how accessible the channel is. Sometimes texts create barriers. Navigating the web, communicating with businesses, it can be a frustrating experience. Sometimes you feel like banging your head against a brick wall would be less painful. And that's where you come in. You have the power to change that. You have the power to make things better. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about accessibility is good for everyone. And some disabled folks object to that idea. They object to the idea of selling accessibility from the perspective of it's good for everyone. They say, and I agree here, that accessibility is about disabled people. They also say that selling accessibility from a perspective of it's good for everyone erases the disability experience, and I think this is where I disagree. It all comes down to how we present the issues, how we sell the topic, how we think about it. If you put a curb cut, after I've told you that curb cuts are good for wheelchair users, for parents with strollers, for kids on skateboards, for delivery people with dollies, the end result is there's a curb cut and I can use it. And that, to me, is a win. So I will use every tool in my toolbox to sell accessibility. However, context is everything. I tend to think of disability as something caused by the environment. The fact that I need to use a wheelchair isn't disabling. That's not the problem. I need to use a wheelchair because I have an impairment. What is disabling me is buildings with long flight of steps to get in. That's disabling. Similarly, our websites, our applications, they can be the factor of us, the builder, disabling our users. Remember that communication channel I was talking about earlier? Well, that's it. Make sure your part of the channel isn't disabling the user. And when we're talking about numbers, the most recent numbers in the United States come from the US Center for Disease Control. According to their research and census data, there's more than 26% of people in the United States that have a disabling condition. That's 1 in 4 persons. That's a lot. And that doesn't even take into consideration the large number of people with long COVID who might have cognitive impairments now. It also doesn't take into account people who have temporary or functional impairments. I had a temporary impairment when I broke both my hands. I'm used to typing 80 words per minute, but suddenly I could only type with the tip of my fingers. I was raising my elbows awkwardly in the air and hitting one key at a time. Now, I'm an accessibility expert. I've worked in this field for a long time, and I know assistive technology. And still, I have to tell you, the experience of weeks in fiberglass casts was very humbling. I had to relearn everything that had to do with using computers. During that time, even though my condition was only temporary, it was quite disabling to come across a website that did not work with keyboard only. Although I was slow typing, I could type, whereas I could not use a mouse at all. Then, of course, there's situational impairments. Like the parent of a young kid, sick infant is in their arm, and they're trying to get information about the condition, looking up symptoms, or booking a telehealth appointment on their phone. Their focus is on the baby, not so much on the phone, not so much on the interface. So if we build things that makes them think, that slows them down, we've actually disabled them. It's temporary, it's situational, yes, but we've made it harder for them to use our platform. Maybe even impossible. So there's a lot of people with conditions that translate into disabilities, permanent or temporary. But playing the numbers game, it's losing the game altogether, because it separates, it creates barriers between disabled and abled. The truth is, we're all only temporarily abled. Well, I mean, I'm not saying that to scare you, maybe a little, but realistically, at some point in our lives, we all will have impairments. And the point here is we're all in this together. The last thing we need is creating more barriers. How do you do that? Well, sometimes you need to think a little bit outside the box, or maybe even a lot outside the box. Disabled folks are good at that. If you ask them, they'll tell you, They've spent a lifetime of dealing with barriers and figuring out how to work through the barriers, over the barriers, around the barriers, figuring out how to work with these things. For example, a long time ago, I was the program director of a small nonprofit. I had limited office space and I had to double up staff in each office. I had Horacio, who was blind. Some of his needs in an office was to make sure that there wouldn't be clutter, that things would be organized, and that he could depend on his chair being where he left it last. He also routinely used a Braille embosser to print material in Braille. Now, these machines are really noisy. And this is where I thought, well, Julie is deaf. She needed to be able to meet with her consumers and hold confidential meetings with other deaf folks using sign language. But Julie was really neat and organized. She always kept things really clean and tidy. So I thought, well, that could work because the embosser noise was not going to affect her. And since Horacio was blind, he could not see those confidential sign language discussions. I figured they could share an office, and lo and behold, it worked. When they needed to communicate, they would send email to one another. It was probably one of the biggest, somewhat unexpected success because we were thinking outside of the box. We were thinking in terms of how do we make things work. Here's another example. I met George when I visited a nursing home in the early 2000s. George was 23 years old. He was quadriplegic from a gunshot wound delivered through a drive-by shooting that was not actually aimed at him. He got a stray bullet. George was stuck in a nursing home because when this happened, his housing was not accessible. They didn't have the money to make the housing accessible either, so he landed in a nursing home. And he was stuck in bed because nobody had bothered to fill out the forms to order a new power wheelchair for him. So he spent most of his days either in bed or somewhere parked in a manual wheelchair that he could not operate. So our group, we quickly organized a wheelchair for him. We got a demonstration wheelchair from a durable medical equipment vendor who donated it. Then we helped him find an accessible apartment, and we helped him move in. And shortly after that, he started coming into our office to learn how to use computer. He was really keen and he was really good with it. So we organized a computer for him. No, it wasn't the latest and greatest, most cutting-edge computer. No, it wasn't. It was a second-hand machine cobbled together with spare parts from dead machines that weren't working, but we could get a hard drive here and a bit of RAM there, and it worked. Then he stopped coming to our office, and we kind of lost track of him. He dropped off the radar. But 2 years later, we got an email, and he was thanking us for helping him. He said to us that what we did with him, we didn't do it for him, we did it with him. We helped him organize all these things. We referred to it as his escape. All our help meant that he was able to start a business. He started selling nurses' uniform, and he started by marketing those to the nursing home staff where he had spent 4 years. 2 years later, here he is. He went from being stuck in bed to being a self-sufficient entrepreneur. He actually went from someone who was considered a drain on society to being a taxpayer. All because a small group of people bothered to help, bothered to think outside the box and try to figure out, how do we make this happen? George went from surviving to living a good independent life, no less. So let's bring it back to tech a little bit more directly, right? Back in the 90s, I was working with Larry. Larry was a colleague with cerebral palsy, and for some people, he was hard to understand when he spoke. So he used a communication board. It was a custom device. There were buttons on the board, each with pre-programmed words or sentences. The device could talk the words and sentences on the speaker depending on which button he pressed, and that cost more than $4,000. That was very expensive. Now, fast forward several decades, and for the last several years, people in Larry's situation, now they can rely on much cheaper technology. You can use a tablet with some custom software, and suddenly you've reduced the cost of communication. It won't work for everyone, because if you have tremors or you can't control fine motor control, it can be hard to hit the right keys. But it works for a lot of people. It also has the advantage that a tablet isn't as intimidating as a large communication board. People are familiar with tablets. So folks using these communication tools are perceived as more approachable, less scary. This is a win for everyone. Accessibility, it's good for everyone. I keep saying that, but I mean it. And it's where the tie-in with universal design is so strong. A website with low contrast, it'll be hard to read for people with low vision. It will also be hard to read for folks with perfect vision if they look at the site on their mobile phone in full sun. A form with tiny touch targets, it'll be difficult for someone with tremors to interact with, but it will also be difficult for someone trying to interact with the form on public transit, for example. Now, as I said, a curb cut, it's good for wheelchair users. It's also good for parents with strollers and so many other people. But if you think in terms of WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, as being the be-all and end-all of accessibility, it's easy to start thinking in terms of checklist. You go down the list, you check one item after the other, and when you reach the end, ta-da, it's done. Except that accessibility does not work that way. It's never done. You can always improve on it. You can go beyond the standard. It's a continuum. We often hear that accessibility work is about equality. But equality is a little bit like giving 3 kids the same box. Some of them climb on the box and they still can't see the game over the wooden fence. Most disabled folks I know, they're not specifically after equality. We're much more interested in equitable treatment. Equity in this case would be to not give the tall kid any box, give the middle kid 1 box, and then you give the shortest kids 2 box. He can stack those one on top of the other, and when they are looking over the fence, they can all see the game over the fence. I really like this image of comparing and contrasting equality and equity. But what if we thought in terms of barriers-free instead? Don't look at the mechanics of how the kids can see above the fence. Look at how you can remove the fence or make the fence see-through. Build your website, your application in a way that just works as is, out of the box, for all disabled folks. Just remove the barriers altogether instead of thinking about providing an equitable experience, because you are going to reach your goal if you do that. Now, when we're looking at accessibility work, really what we're looking at is a tech solution to a human problem. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying disabled folks are a problem, far from that. But we're human. And when the tech fails us, when the tech doesn't work, we have problems, we have barriers, and suddenly it's disabling. There's a Maori proverb I really like. It says, and please forgive the pronunciation, it says, He aha te mea nui o te ao. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. In English, that's what's the most important thing in the world? It's the people, the people, the people. Remember I was talking about thinking outside the box earlier? Well, forget that. Don't think outside the box. Smash the box. Push the envelope. Don't limit yourself to what's out there. Build on that. Go beyond. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it's great documentation. It's a great starting point of accessibility. It's the starting line. It's not the end goal. So go beyond that. I'm going to finish with a challenge for you. Take the time to make things more inclusive, more accessible, talk more inclusively, build things with universal design in mind. And remember that accessibility, well, it's part of that. I want more from you because I know you have it in you. You're here, you're listening to this presentation, you've stuck through the whole thing. Congratulations. But I have a bit of work for you. I'm going to leave you with some homework. Think about one element of this presentation that really struck you and consider what you're going to do about it. How are you going to implement that in your work? How are you going to spread the message? That's a good question. Think about it. It's important. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for being here, and please feel free to reach out to me later on Twitter or other social media, by email, and please subscribe and listen to the podcast. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for that video, Nick. It was great. I know that, hope everybody got a lot out of it. And we're going to open the chat room now, and please use the Q&A button to submit any questions that you have for Nick. And, hopefully we will be able to get to a lot of them. Let's see here. The first one we have is a question from Eric. He asks, Nick, can you speak to a moment where introducing the social model of disability was a non-starter for working with a client, and what can you do about that?
That's a wonderful question. I actually try not to introduce the concept of social model or medical model with clients because it confuses things. I mentioned it in the discussion here earlier, talking about what disables me and what doesn't. Steps is disabling, the wheelchair isn't, because I think in our context it's important. But typically, clients, they're not interested in that. They're interested in, well, we have this problem, we have a website, we have an application, maybe we're getting sued, maybe we have a client that wants to have things accessible. And typically when I start talking about social model of disability or these kind of things, it's after we've had a period of engagement together where they already start to know me and they already start to understand how accessibility works. So these concepts is maybe beyond the accessibility 101 approach. There was one time though I did it, and it was actually a firm, a medical firm, and that was a very interesting experience because they were all very much in the mindset that disability is a negative in the person, and they know better because they're the medical providers. They know better what's going to be good for the person. So I thought in that context, introducing them to a different perspective about accessibility and disability was going to be important. It took a little bit of playing around with it. What it comes down to though is really about the people. I say that a lot because it's so important. When you are able to tell human stories, when you're able to take it away from a theoretical level to a real situation where it has a real impact, like the story of George, like the story of Larry, these things are striking and they are memorable. So from that perspective, I think if you are going to introduce these concepts at all, don't do it immediately when you start the engagement, and do it later on and tie it to individual stories. Don't start talking about the theory itself, but make it a human a human experience. Don't dive into inspiration. This is not about being inspirational, but use real life stories that are going to strike the imagination.
Oh,
Adam, you're muted. See, it's a
I'm
problem.
gonna do that every session. So we have a question from Brent. He says that Nick, I love your content. I've only just heard about your podcast. Is there a good episode to start on as a new listener?
Oh la la. I think all the episodes are good. And obviously I'm biased, but the series of episodes that I think are going to be most interesting to the audience here is all the series of the sound bites. Those are short 5 to 10 minutes episodes where I talk with disabled people about the barriers they experience on the web. And this actually might be a great segue from introducing this perspective of social model where I was saying, talk about individual experiences. Well, there's over 40 short episodes where there's these experiences, and I said they're all good because they're all short and they all cover aspects of disability and accessibility that are not typically spoken about in the context of web accessibility. So, if anything, I would say just pick a show and work your way down, or start from the very first one and work your way down from there. Just go for it.
Great. Deborah asks, what do you suggest as a first resource to share with agencies who want to make things more accessible but don't really know where to start?
There are a lot of really good resources out there. Sometimes it feels very fragmented. I would suggest that as a first stop, people should go to the W3C website, the Web Accessibility Initiative, because it's been worked on in such a way that it introduces concepts, and there's a lot of really good information. There's information there for all ranges, whether it's developers, designers, other stakeholders. There's videos, there's even explanation about doing quick checks of accessibility. So if anyone, even a CEO reading that, can actually start testing their own website or app for accessibility and start to get a feel from that. And the beauty of the W3C website is that it gives more information, and there's you can go down the rabbit hole as you will, and really dig and get a lot of information. So that would be where I would go. w3.org/WAI.
Great. The next question is from Jennifer, and it can be difficult to even realize some of the barriers that people face when we've experienced it or witnessed it ourselves. Do you have any advice for starting to learn the different needs of persons that may have never even occurred to me?
Yeah, it's that eternal quandary of you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know that you don't know. That's really a trick. I would say that the web is full of disabled people talking about their experiences, and here it might be a question of just start looking. Look at my podcast. There's 40 testimonies there of things that may not have occurred to you, from the person who says, well, I have dyslexia and dyscalculia, and one of the things that I do to be able to read is I click and select text on the page, and that allows me to focus on only one small segment of text. And if we're making things that don't allow users to use their mouse to highlight text, then we've disabled them. From that to if you have a product website and you use strange colors like sunset on the beach, that is not descriptive for someone who's blind. So if you start looking, I guarantee you that pretty soon you're going to find more and more and more really interesting stuff to explore and learn about. And also, you have to give yourself a break. I've been doing this for a very long time, and every time I do usability studies with disabled people, I learn new stuff. So it's the field is so vast. There's so many things to learn about that it's an ongoing process.
Next up is a question from Kylie. Would it be okay to use your barrier-free visual in a training presentation, specifically asking about the visual where the three people are watching a sporting event and the third visual has a chain link fence? If so, how would you like that to be cited?
No, yeah, absolutely. Feel free to use it and just my name, no problem.
Great. Next up, we have one from Glenn. I've heard it said that communication is the responsibility of the sender. What are your thoughts on that?
I firmly believe that communication is a two-way avenue, and that the receiver has responsibility to take active part in that. Obviously, I'm not putting the entire onus on the receiver because the sender needs to do their job. But have you ever experienced a conversation, whether it's a friend, family member, or colleague, where you're feeling you're actually talking at a brick wall and there's nothing you can say or no way you can present it that actually is getting through? This is where the sender doesn't have the entire responsibility. It's got to be a meeting ground. Given that we have an accessible channel and everything else around that, but I do think that both parties are responsible for making successful communication.
It's muted again. I think I'd learned that lesson by now. So that's actually the last question that we had in the Q&A currently. We do still have some time. If I know somebody out there is thinking of a question, and please just put those into the Q&A and we'll get those asked to Nick. And looks like we have a couple more coming in. Alicia asks, do you mind people sharing your resources with professors and or educators? They are so valuable.
Please, by all means, share them with professors, educators, your parents, the grocery store clerk. Share it with everyone. I want to evangelize about accessibility, about inclusion, about disability awareness, and the more the merrier. These things are meant to be shared. If there are no more questions, I would like to start you on your homework that I gave you. Can anybody tell me what's the one thing that really struck you about what I said today in the pre-recorded video? Don't be shy.
All right, looks like we have some coming into the Q&A here. So Jody says, can you share any examples of websites that you think smash the box in regards to accessibility? I know that's
it's difficult to always be on top of which websites are great in terms of accessibility and not, because things change so often. But one that really I keep going back to is the website for the school that trained my service dog, Mira, and the website is mira.ca/en. The default site is in French, which probably is not helpful to most of the audience here, but some of the things that I really like is how they made a really nicely visually appealing website. There's different ways to present the content. There's animations, but there's also ways to turn off those animations, and the information is easy to find. It's just an all-around really good looking website and it's an accessible website, but it hasn't aimed to obviously be a website that's going to work for disabled people. It just so happens that that's the case, and I think that's really, I think that to me, is really important. I was interviewing a member of the deaf community earlier for my podcast, Meryl Evans, and she said something that really struck me. She said that captions are super important, and that if you notice the captions, then the captions aren't done well. And I think this is the same thing for accessibility. If you're going to notice the accessibility effort, it hasn't been done well. It should be something that just is integrated and flows. And that's where I think we smash the box with accessibility.
It looks like that question gave some people some time to answer your call to action there.
Yeah.
We'll get some in the regular chat and in the Q&A.
I see Kylie says that disability versus impairment and the differences struck. I think that's really important to realize that, because when we start thinking about those differences, it gives this paradigm shift. Thinking about accessibility is very different. So thanks for that, Kylie. Glenn liked my response to the dog. That's usually a favorite. I at the time I was really annoyed, but in retrospect it just really amuses me, and it gives me good material for presentations. So that's always fun. Lots of feedback around, George leaving the nursing home, different perspective of impairment and disability. So there are things that really struck with you, and I'm so happy about that. So the next level then is, what are you going to do to implement that? Are you going to spread the message? Are you going to tell these stories to your colleagues? Are you going to be able to translate these examples of real world physical barrier accessibility into digital? I think the tangible experiences, the tangible examples of accessibility in the real world are very useful to understand what we do in the digital accessibility world. So how are you going to use that? All right. Weston is saying, I liked in your video that you stated we are all temporarily abled. We can experience an impairment or disability at any time. And then asks, is there a particular way to recognize an accessibility barrier? This comes with experience. It's one of those things you have to get started. As I said earlier, you start with one podcast and you dig in and you learn more. Or you start with the Web Accessibility Initiative website to dig in and learn more. It's the same. You find one barrier, you start to explore that, and you realize that, and then you are able to learn a bit more about different things. It really is a journey, and the more you do it, the more you realize there is to do. And I'm not saying that to discourage you out of the gate, but I think you really do. You really do need to just take it a little bit at a time. If you haven't done accessibility testing, do things like use your keyboard to navigate through the website, and you can do a whole bunch of stuff. Referring you back to the YE website, there's a section there on accessibility easy checks, which really itemizes the different areas you can look at, and that's a great starting point from starting to identify barriers, which really are compliance with the accessibility guidelines as a starting point.
Some additional questions. We got one from Melissa, who asks, what are some common barriers or things you run into in working with clients and running user testing?
So there's a lot of stuff from my perspective as a independent consultant. One of the things that I see a lot of is um, incorrect use of markup. So when we're looking from a very technical perspective, we want to use HTML and we want to use HTML correctly. Unfortunately, with a lot of the content management systems or development framework like React, Vue, Angular, these things tend to deliver poor markup, which causes a lot of headaches from a purely making the web accessible. Uh, Other things, I started in the mid 90s talking about alt text for images. I said early in the video I wasn't going to talk about that, but I think we still need to mention that because 30 years on, it's still something that every single client I work with, every single audit I run, ends up having problems around images. So this really is one of those things where you want to identify, make sure your markup is right, make sure your images are right, make sure things function well with the keyboard, and with these you're going to be really in a good place to go to the level above a little bit more about accessibility remediation if you want.